G'day, my name's Steve Weyland and welcome to Two Blokes and a Motorbike. This show's about two mates restoring classic motorcycles from the 70s, the 80s, right up to the late 90s. One bike at a time, because quite frankly, we're easily confused. We've got a lot of experience to draw on, so hopefully you'll come along for the ride and we'll keep it entertaining.
Two Blokes and a Motorbike is brought to you by bikereview.com.au.
Welcome to our second episode. In our first episode, we carefully married up the motor and the frame. We bolted on the stand and uprighted the bike, so far, so good. In this show, we'll attempt to fit the swing arm and shock absorbers. The rear wheel gets built and goes in, and we'll even assemble the forks. So let's get to it. Okay, it's 35 degrees Celsius today, folks, so we're starting early. And if you can hear a noise in the background, it's probably the fan, because we're in a tin shed. Anywho, this contraption is a swing arm. Some prefer swinging arm, some prefer swingers parties, but that's a whole different show. Anywho, this allows the suspension to go up and down, folks. We've got to mount it on the bike. Before we do, we put this on because from past experience we've learned that trying to fit this rear brake hose to the swing arm after you've mounted the swing arm in the frame is an absolute nightmare. And this rod here is just to hold the rear caliper in place when it's on the bike, and it's easier to do it before than after. Anywho, we're going to fit this now. First, this goes on, because if we don't put this on first, you can't get it on afterwards. Another trap for young players, folks. Perhaps we better show you what this is.
This goes and activates the rear brake. We have to put this into the frame first. Makes it a whole lot easier doing it now than once the swing arm's in. It's very hard to do.
Once the brake actuator is in place, Mike greases and fits the new bushes, bearings and shims to the swing arm and gently taps on the outer caps. Then, without damaging its freshly powder-coated surface, we guide it into place. Mike then slides through the pivot bolt from the correct side and finger tightens the nut. Folks, when you mount your swing arm, you want to make sure that you've got good bearings and bushes in there. Make sure there's no corrosion, because pitting is thine enemy. You've got to make sure everything's nice and smooth. Replace the bearings if you need to. We've replaced these. We've got new bushes and spacers and stuff. So there's no lateral movement. You don't want a hinge in the middle of your frame. It's not good for handling at all. All you want is up and down movement. So just double check that. Nobody wants a sloppy back end. This, like Mike's haircut, is a shocker.
You've been waiting on one to say that.
I've been planning that one for a while. Ever since you got the haircut, in fact. Anywho, it's a shocker. We have a pair of these to go on the bike because back in the good old days, most bikes had two shocks. Most bikes nowadays have one shock, monoshock rear end. The old twin shock design was ditched basically because it didn't have enough travel. Bikes didn't handle as well as they do now. It was heavier, it was less adjustable. Lots of reasons they've gone away from the twin shock design. The only bikes that really use twin shocks these days are cruisers. And you're probably not going to see a cruiser in this garage for a while. Now, since the original shock absorbers were too far gone to reuse, we decided to splash out and buy a pair of locally made, fully adjustable units. Their gloss black finish will perfectly suit the end result we're looking for. Now, you can of course pay less and buy a pair of crap shockers from a third world country, but you might as well use a pair of overripe mangoes, because sometimes it's better to pay a bit more and get something that works. While they're not all silver like the originals, they still look of the era and not too blingy, which would detract from the bike. You know, everyone has their own idea of what looks good in a bike. And just the same as people, they come in all different shapes and sizes. Motorcycle displays are a bit like an old public flogging. They tend to bring like-minded people together. And if we're going to get this Katana together, we'd better press on. Okay, it's wheel time. Now bear in mind that this pair of 40-year-old wheels have seen more rubber changes than Charlie Sheen, but unlike Charlie, they still scrub up okay. And by scrub up, I'll show you exactly what I mean. All you need to do is get a bowl of warm water, some steel wool, and I find the soapy kind the best, and then loads and loads of elbow grease. I'm demonstrating on similar wheels because I simply neglected to film me doing the originals. Sorry. Anyway, like most alloy wheels, over time they build up corrosion, brake dust and road grime. I spent a few hours on each and by the end I had no fingerprints left. But after a final rub with some metal polish, they came up a treat. And now it's back to Mike.
We're going to be fitting the rear sprocket to the hub. Shiny new rear sprocket. Shiny.
And it's got all its teeth, unlike Mike. Go on.
And a shiny second-hand hub, and this is a recycled hub, as in we got it second-hand from another fella, because the one that came with the bike, as you can see, the holes are flogged out because he had the wrong size bolts in.
So we bought the right bolts from Suzuki instead of from the cheese shop. And these are designed not to move when you tighten the nuts on the sprocket.
Put a couple of them in. Sprocket on.
In case you've wondered, Mike does like a small daub of thread locking compound from time to time. Anyway, then he drops on his locking tabs, pops on the nuts, tightens them up, and Bob's your uncle. You may recall seeing this from our first episode in Trade Tips. This happens when the cush drive rubbers are worn out, so check them for wear and tear before refitting the wheel. Ours were okay, so Mike chucks them back in.
Right tool for the right job.
That's a hammer.
What these things are called a cush drive, a cushion, and they take out the snatchiness of the old transmissions or the old chain and sprockets of these bikes. They tend to get a bit snatchy, and so these stop that initial harshness when you first let the clutch out on the bike, and just make the ride a whole lot smoother on the open road. So we're going to be fitting the sprocket carrier into that so we can torque it up to the right torque settings. Makes it a lot easier when you do.
So Mike fits the sprocket carrier into the hub, and now that he's got some leverage, he can torque up the nuts properly. And then he crimps up the lock washers.
Rear sprocket fitted to the hub, all torqued and tensioned and Loctited and ready to go. Okay, now we're going to assemble the rear wheel into the frame. We're going to assemble the axle into the rear wheel first before we actually mount it, so it just makes it a bit easier than trying to slide the axle through and hold the spaces in the wheel at the same time. You need 4 hands and it's just overly. Just making sure that the mark is at the top so we can line it up with the adjusters here that are on the swing arm. So we'll slide that on. Then this spacer goes on next, like so. Now it goes into the wheel. All the way through. Now we'll put on these other spacers. First, that one there.
That covers the bearing. Then we have the caliper holder, which is a brand new part we bought. Fortunately, Suzuki parts are relatively cheap, so it's worth replacing them if they're dodgy, especially if they look half-assed. Okay,
Another chain adjuster.
and the other chain adjuster, and again, have the mark up. And yes, we have bolted on the rear brake disc, but that's hardly exciting to watch. So we'll get this wheel in place and adjust it later when we fit the chain. Here's some more tips on what to look for when you're buying a used bike. Always check the wheel and swing arm bearings. By using the leverage of the wheel, you can check for any looseness at the swing arm pivot and the axle. You can repeat that test on the front wheel by getting someone to hold it on full lock while you try to twist the wheel. Now with the front wheel off the ground, see if you can feel any looseness in the forks or steering head. We'll use a different bike to demonstrate this one. With the wheel off the ground, gently swing the bars from side to side. Any resistance or notchiness may indicate the bearings are over tightened or just plain knackered. And if you ride a bike with bearings like this, it'll feel like you're stuck in tram tracks. You might also want to check the suspension action by compressing the forks a few times. If they rocket back up faster than a cheap spumante at a Melbourne Cup luncheon, then they've probably leaked out all the oil, and you'll need to at least replace the fork seals. The same goes for the rear. And although this shocker might sound like an old mattress in a knock shop, it's actually still got good damping. A quick check underneath reveals no leaking either. So the good news here is that while the redbacks might try and kill us, the suspension won't. We're back again with some fork assembly. This is one that Mike did earlier. Now these forks we had to pull apart and basically get repainted. The whole lower leg was repainted. That's been re-hard chromed. We sent that to... Sorry, but there'll be no endorsements on this show until someone else starts paying for our beers. Too many pits, just too worn out, which is... At some point you have to do it. You've got to bite the bullet, spend the money, get them done. That way you'll have no more leaks. They look fantastic and they work. Anywho, this one's already been assembled. Now we're going to put this together. Well, Mike's going to put this together and show you hopefully how to do it without any faults or problems.
There. So firstly, you've got your new fork leg here, all freshly hard chromed. The only part that we have to put on this is the part that goes up the top there.
Mike always refers to the factory manual to see where the parts go and to see what Suzuki decided to call them.
So this part here is the piston, and that just helps with the sliding action when it's all together. Bit of spray on there, just to go on easier, because you can't buy these anymore, these little bits, so if you do break one, you're in shtuck. So that's on there. Now, the next part, I'll take off this bit of tape here where we got it painted. So this is the damper rod, and that's the most important part of the fork really. If you didn't have that with the little spring on it here, it wouldn't be very good suspension, that's for sure. Now Suzuki, in all their wisdom, when they designed this fork, you need a special tool which probably cost a fortune to assemble them. So I've just got this piece of hex right here to do that special tool. It's got it clamped into the front wheel lock there to use as a vise. So that goes on there.
Now I'll mysteriously reappear to look like I know something about fork building.
So we have our damper rod with spring on, and now we slide the fork inner down the damper rod. Normally you need a special tool, but I've just got this bit of hex bar here which does the job. Get that through the hole. There's your damper rod. So then we put on the wave washers and the flat washers in the special order. Wave, flat, wave. Then the piece. Special piece.
The piece. How did they come up with that name? They must have spent days on that.
They did.
Piece.
Piece. What should we call it? A piece. And then you have your fork lower, or fork leg lower, which goes on last of all. And all going well, that should locate into the thread.
Look at that. Beautiful.
Yes.
Apologies for the distracting daylight in the background, folks. Nobody seemed to notice that halfway through filming, Barry, the resident blue tongue in Mike's shed, let himself out the back door.
And all this does is stop the damper rod from turning when you do up this screw. That's bolt. That's all it's there for. But without it, it's not going to happen. So that's nipped up. So that bit's done. Now we fit the new fork seal.
And you'd be an absolute fool to not fit new fork seals after getting this re-hard chromed. They don't cost that much, and there's nothing worse than leaky forks. Runs down your fork leg, all over your discs, ruins your brake pads, you've got to start again.
There we go. Now that goes on.
So Mike gently slides the new fork seal over the fork and then whips out his special tool.
That's in there, but it's got to go in there a whole lot more. All right, so that goes there, and this is designed to fit several different size fork legs. So this is a 37mm fork, but this tool can apparently go between 35s and 39s, something like that. So it just comes apart, but that just basically bangs down onto the rubber there. Now, and that's
Pretty good.
That's how we fit
It's
a
gone
fork
in.
seal. Now I'll just get the spring clip.
Now that's gone in a good, gee, 10, 15 mil. It's driven straight in. So that tool actually, it worked. It's worth its weight in gold. Most universal tools don't fit anything. But this actually was a good investment.
It worked. Now we have the spring, which holds in the seal. Little guy.
Nah,
And if it's down properly, it will audibly click into place.
audibly.
Audibly.
Did we hear the click?
I think we might have.
It's clicked.
Okay, and that
There you
should
go.
be locked and loaded. One assembled fork leg. So now we're fitting the anti-dive unit to the fork leg. The two O-rings there seal up against that flat surface. It's nice and smooth. It looks a bit daggy, but it is nice and smooth. So just hold the O-rings as we turn it over, hold it all into place like so.
So Mike fits 2 new bolts to secure it in place and then loosely fits the bottom axle clamps so we don't lose them.
How much did these washers cost me, Steve?
This is $3.80.
$3.63 for 100 of them.
Have you counted them?
No, I didn't.
I would count them.
But
And I'd
certainly
take them back if there was one short.
cheaper than buying genuine again. Stuff like that, you just don't need to buy genuine.
$3.80, I saw you coming.
All right.
Okay, let's talk about this anti-dive thing for a moment. You won't learn anything by watching it while you're riding. What you will do is crash, so let's try and explain it. First I'll read Suzuki's version of how it works.
When you squeeze the brake lever, according to Suzuki's brochure, not only does the front brake engage, but simultaneously it operates a plunger in the anti-dive device, which limits the flow of oil in the front fork. In other words, the front of the bike doesn't dive under brakes.
And now we'll hear Mike's version of how it doesn't work.
So this is a Katana that's had the anti-dive removed. It's been blanked off with these plates here. So what happens is when you press the brake lever, or pull the brake lever, the pressure goes straight down to the caliper and your braking's instantaneous. Much better system. Now on this other Katana, it's still got the anti-dive system set up. So when you pull on the brake lever, not only does the force of the brake fluid go down to the caliper, it also leaves the caliper and goes to the top of the anti-dive unit. At the same time, when the fork compresses, the fork oil pushes up to the bottom of the anti-dive unit, and in theory that's supposed to stop the forks from diving. In reality, it just makes the brakes less effective.
And Suzuki claimed that if you encounter bumps while you're braking, the anti-dive function is suspended in order to restore soft suspension. Anyone else smell bullshit? Look, at the end of the day, it wasn't the be-all and end-all to anti-dive. In fact, this system was ditched a few years later. The other problem with it, if you try and bleed the brakes with this system, it's an absolute nightmare. And there's one other issue. If it leaks, and a lot of these 40-year-old systems do, you can't buy parts for them internally anyway. Never could, as far as we know. So if it leaks, blank it off. If you're not happy with the brakes, blank it off. If you can't bleed the brakes, blank it off.
Do what all the racers did back in the 80s. Just blank them off. Having said all of that, we're going to keep ours on there because A, it's not leaking, B, the brakes are good enough for an old bike, and it looks better. Well, I guess that's as clear as mud. Now, back to the build.
Now we're going to fit the dust seal, which is the last part of the leg. Just put a bit of WD on there so it slides over there nice. Bit of lube, never hurts. And here's your clean fork boot. That just slides down over the fork and done.
At this point we've got the fork mostly assembled, anti-dive units on the front of it. We've got the axle clamp on the bottom just to so we don't lose it. The dust cap is back over the new fork seal, and we're about to put the spring in and some oil and the cap on top, so it'll be a sealed unit and ready for installation on the bike. Take it away, Mike.
I'll have to get something to measure the fork oil into.
We're going to measure the fork oil. Pretty accurate measurement. It has to be accurate. It has to be spot on. Every bike has a different level of fork oil. Some you measure from the top down with a ruler of some kind.
Capacity. Yeah.
Some it's capacity. In this case, yeah, capacity. So we're going to get something to measure the fork oil into. We'll be right back.
As you see,
Fork springs.
the fork springs have a closer wind one end and a not so close wind, a wider wind at the other end.
A wider wind.
Wider wind.
Wider wind.
And they do have to go in a particular way. I'm pretty sure
It's the tight end at the
the
bottom.
tight end at
usually.
the top.
Really?
Yeah. So let's just double check, shall we?
So yes, he double checked, and it is big end in the bum. I hate it when he's right.
So the large end
In the bottom.
in the bottom.
All right.
So that goes in there.
There we go.
And that goes
We'll
in
tip in the oil.
there.
And somehow, miraculously, like a pint of beer, it disappears in seconds.
Well, that was exciting.
Wasn't it though? So that's pretty close. Now this goes in, I don't know what they call this,
Got another piece.
but it's what the spring adjuster, this is an adjuster which pushes down on the spring, which gives you some form of adjusting the harshness of the ride. So that goes on there and that pushes down on it.
I know what you're thinking. Bloody hell, I remember to take a close-up.
And this gives you a 3-position adjustment to putting tension on the fork spring. So this is on the softest setting, and if you push it right out, and that's on the hardest setting. So the harder the setting, the more of this is out to put more tension on the spring. When we're assembling it, we're going to put it on the softest setting because it's easier to put in. When it's on the bike, it's adjusting in there is a slot for a flat blade screwdriver to go into, so you can do it without having to pull the forks apart. Again, I think this was the first time they'd done that on a Suzuki, but it certainly gives you a lot more scope to adjust the suspension than what you used to be able to.
When you have to get someone to get down on their knees and grab a hold of your fork leg and hold it steady, Mike's advice is don't use an idiot.
Ow, 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 ow. Now I will read a couple of quick emails that we've received. I think you're a wanker and your show is full of crap. Grandma. For the love of God, will you guys please wear some makeup? It's constructive. Now we've received an official email from the Suzuki GS650G Owners Group of Australia. They weren't too happy with my comments about the 650 Katana in our last episode. Dear Sir, after conducting a survey of our entire membership, both of us agree that we take offence at your disparaging remarks and seek an apology forthwith. Club President Reginald Shortcock. Well, fair enough, Reggie. I may have gone too far. I mean, who knew? There are people out there who actually do like riding shitboxes. My humble apologies.
So this time round, the swing arm is in, the springs are on, the rear wheel is put together and chucked in, and the forks are finally assembled. In our next episode, after fitting the front discs and the forks, we'll get the front wheel and handlebars on the bike and move it onto the workbench. Then it's headlight, gauges, and if all goes to plan, on with the chain and sprocket.
I've been Mike Tucker.
And I've been Steve Weyland. See you next time.
And we'll talk some more. Well, your stuff's not funny.
Two Blokes and a Motorbike is brought to you by bikereview.com.au.